is an act of continual labor. It is through strenuous building that we create and remodel our knowledge scaffolds. But knowledge construction, particularly in young, malleable brains, can be deceptive. This is because short-term memorization by student learners can be easily confused, particularly by us, advanced practitioners, as being equal to the building of strong knowledge scaffolds. I draw on a metaphor of a true construction site scaffold. A wobbly wooden scaffold held temporarily together with twisty ties and bubblegum may maintain structure long enough to paint a house, only to fall apart before it can be used to paint the house the next year or for any other job for that matter. A student may memorize every part of a eukaryotic cell, and they may recite it perfectly on a Friday exam, only to forget nearly every fact by the next Monday's class. The building of strong knowledge scaffolds necessitates more than passive learning. A long-standing scaffold that enables one to paint the house year after year requires mindful energy investment and an awareness of the job that needs to be enabled by the tool. Active learning means more than simply having the skills to pound in nails, cut boards, and assemble. It means thinking critically about what job the final product will allow one to do. It means considering how the tool can be made into something adaptable, something that would allow for the painting of any house or even a skyscraper. Educators' knowledge that learners must be actively engaged in the process of learning, it's not new. In 1903, John Dewey wrote in Democracy and Education, which was an article that preceded his book, Democracy and Education, in which he made the plea to that educators and students both be liberated and free to construct their own knowledge, to build strong scaffolds that could be adaptable in any context. However, as is often true, when the rush to paint the house becomes more important than the quality and replicability of the job, rickety scaffolds allow for the illusion that, at least for now, the painting job is good enough. Our 19th century industrial school system model, built to mirror the factory assembly lines of the first industrial revolution, has promoted the rickety scaffold and the illusion of learning, rather than the time-consuming, high energy requiring true, deep applied learning. Now, in her book, Kathy N. Davidson, this is called The New Education, she writes, if Model Ts could be produced cheaply and effectively by standardization and automation in any color you want, so long as it's black, then so could learning. In this model of education, student achievement is measured by exams, ranging from the typical midterm and final to the culminating standardized exam that determines college admission, medical school admission, accreditation to practice as an engineer. These metrics of success all enable students to succeed with rickety scaffolds. They can memorize temporarily, they can regurgitate, and we get the illusion of learning. So I hope some of you out there have watched the movie The Matrix, and there's the waking in The Matrix. Repeated educators have had this moment of reckoning with the illusion of learning nurtured by the industrial model of education. At the end of the 20th century, a physics instructor, Harvard professor named Eric Mazur, had what he terms the eye opener. He realized that students came into his class with an existing knowledge scaffold that determined their basic beliefs about how physics works, laws of motion and such. While students' existing scaffolds vary in strength and adaptability, his assessment of students' learning showed that instruction in his physics course really didn't do a whole lot to change their existing scaffolds of knowledge. Whether they earned an A or whether they learned a C, their ideas were not moved. So Mazur popularized this lack of impact of taking a college class on student knowledge, but others have shown this before. In fact, voluminous literature. Students are able to use the metaphorical twisty tie and bubble gum to briefly reinforce their rickety scaffold in order to memorize and restate on an exam. I'm certainly guilty. They then remove the twisty dies or they just degrade and fall away. And really, students say, well, that's okay because my scaffold allowed me to give Professor Z what she wanted on the exam. They can now rest assured that their rickety scaffold once again got the job done. The scaffold itself goes unchanged. It has not been renovated, rebuilt, or having greater strength or adaptability. Now, Missouri's solution to students' lack of deep learning within the traditional passive physics lecture hall was to adopt peer-to-peer teaching. Together, students solved real problems. They learned through discussion. They had to convince one another that their approach was correct. They had to teach each other. Moreover, they had to actively interrogate their existing knowledge scaffold. When it failed to support weight, they had to find ways to rebuild it so that the peer team could fully be supported by that scaffold. They tested it, tried it again, it failed, and they tried it again. Learners must be actively engaged in the transformation of their knowledge scaffolds. Passive lecturing begets illusionary learning. Educators and educational researchers repeatedly show that active, engaged students succeed. In 2014, a large-scale meta-analysis by a team of researchers led by Scott Freeman showed that students in traditional lecture courses are 1.5 times more likely to fail. In every STEM discipline, active learning improves students' performance also on the type of assessments that show conceptual understanding, the ones like Mazur looked at to see if students' scaffolds were actually moved. So this effect is strongest for higher level cognitive skills. Yet passive instruction and the matrix of illusionary learning, particularly in science, continues to predominate. In 2015, Nature published a feature news called The Science of Teaching Science by Mitchell Waldrop, filled with unequivocal statements that authentic problem solving is the process by which students learn deeply. The article was even so bold as to take an ethical stance. Waldrop quotes a microbiology professor, Clarissa Dirk, in her statement, "At this point, it is unethical to teach any other way." Allowing students to stay in a state of illusion, one in which they believe they have succeeded, sometimes at the highest level, evidenced by an A, right? When in fact, their temporary twisty ties have long ago fell away from their rickety scaffolds, leaving nothing but the knowledge structures with which they enter their college courses. And that certainly seems unethical to me. Passive instruction and the illusion of learning is something maintained by fictitious debates, such as that surrounding the definition of active learning. Educators determine that if there is no clear definition of the techniques, then how indeed are they to facilitate them? On December 1st of 2020, a 9-page paper was published in CBE Life Sciences Education with the purpose of systematically exploring how the term active learning was used in biology education literature and generating a unifying definition. The definition provided by this research team led by Emily P. Dreisen was, quote, "Active learning is an interactive and engaging process for students that may be implemented through the employment of strategies that involve metacognition, discussion, group work, formative assessment, practicing core competencies, live action visuals, conceptual class design, worksheets, and/or games." While these researchers undoubtedly had the best intentions in performing this study and were likely pushed in this research direction owing to pressures from peers to actually specify what you're talking about before we will try it, I question our need to define what it looks like for students to be doing the work of constructing her own knowledge. In his book called Learner-Centered Teaching, Terry Doyle states, "The person who is doing the work in a classroom is the person doing the most learning." So when we look around, who's doing the work? That's the person doing the most learning. Strong, adaptable knowledge scaffolds take effort in their planning, their building, and their tailoring to every situation. In fact, active learning is a spectrum of many diverse and evolving techniques. I work continually to compile these techniques into an accessible resource called the Active Learning Spectrum. But I know that the minute that I have made an update, a new way to engage a learner in her learning has inevitably been revealed. Many have now formalized the efficacious techniques of learning from peers and packaged them and named them into modalities such as cooperative learning and team-based learning. Scholars of these techniques, such as Barbara Millis, have dedicated a lifetime to describing, employing, and sharing these approaches. Ooh, I've got that book on the shelf. I can get it and show you in a minute. We know they work, and yet the illusion of passive learning remains. And we active learning change agents, we keep taking the bait of retesting the hypothesis. Results sections continually read similarly to the following, which was published in 2015 in the Journal of Nursing Education and Practice by Sandy Branson, Linda Boss, and Deborah Fowler. Quote, when compared to lecture, TBL learners scored significantly higher on their particular type of concept inventory called the AGSI management exam and reported significantly higher critical thinking, leadership, and management skills and better overall course experience ratings. Articles like this continue to pile up. They give rise to meta-analyses such as the aforementioned Freeman article, as well as full textbooks on what it means to enact learner-centered pedagogy. In her book, Learner-Centered Teaching, that one's right here, great book, Mary Ellen Weimer writes, the goal of learner-centered teaching is the development of students as autonomous, self-directed, and self-regulating learners. Said another way, students learn when they actually must critically evaluate the efficaciousness of their knowledge scaffold, have the chance to repeatedly test it in different environments with feedback from others, and are provided with access to tools that allow them to reinforce it, remodel it, and to do this whole thing again and again. Over the last decade, I've had the chance to work with my great mentor, Ed Neufer, and a team of researchers. Together, we study learner self-assessment. Self-assessment is arguably the cornerstone of the knowledge scaffold for learners, as they must come to know of what their knowledge scaffold is capable. This deep knowledge comes not from someone telling the learner what the scaffold can do, instead from repeatedly testing it in different conditions and with different purposes. When students solve real problems together in situations where they are allowed to fail and try again, they build strong, adaptable scaffolds. Once again, we have known this for a long time. In his 1970 book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire writes, they must abandon the educational goal of deposit making, put it in, get it out, and replace it with the posing of problems of human beings in relations with the world. When students work together to solve problems that are relevant to their lives, their knowledge scaffolds are truly tested. They must bear weight under continually changing circumstances. I sometimes indulge myself in envisioning a lively conversation between Paulo Freire and neurologist and molecular biologist and author of the book Brain Rules, John Medina. The latter would reinforce the former with his understanding that the brain works best in outdoor environments while solving constant relevant problems. Students in my microbiology capstone course pair with community partners and work to solve real problems, such as finding phytoremediative solutions to toxic groundwater leaching from decommissioned landfill sites here in our own state of Wyoming. Throughout this problem-solving process, students repeatedly realize the inadequacy of their knowledge scaffolds. They meet with failure, they try again, they build a new and lasting, highly adaptable scaffold. Our institutions of higher education, modeled on the needs of the first industrial revolution, have maintained nearly the same educational approaches as were utilized in the mid-19th century, even as we are on the brink of a new era that Klaus Schwab describes in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. That one I have on ebook, so I can't show it to you right now, but it's a real good one. The problems that we face are multiplistic, complex, and certainly not easily solved by any one discipline. To educate scholars in this landscape, we must not only engage students in their own learning, but we must also provide environments in which they can develop scaffolds of the holistic body-mind. That is, we need to evolve our understanding of knowledge scaffolds to braid together cognitive, affective, and physical domains. Schwab posits that we must apply 4 different types of intelligence: the mind, the heart, the soul, and the body. It is a particular interest that he calls for this at the end of a book that speaks about artificial intelligence 17 times. Yet it makes perfect sense that as our learning becomes more and more digital, our learners must become more and more human. And to promote this, we must utilize active learning in online environments to enable students to build knowledge scaffolds that integrate computational, digital, and virtual materials across those 4 domains of knowledge. And perhaps it is with the help of some of these virtual environments that we will maybe eventually respond to John Dewey's 1903 call that both teacher and learner are liberated to build strong, adaptable, resilient knowledge scaffolds. The end. So thank you for indulging me in that manifesto. I will be posting that as the inaugural blog to be followed by Michelle's first blog posting. She has just been writing in a frenzy, a beautiful frenzy, and we'll be seeing her postings going up. And I just aim for all of you to feel that you have the permission to prioritize writing about teaching and learning, because sometimes we don't feel that. We feel like we have a lot of pressures on our plate, and that one doesn't always rise up to the top. By the way, if you would prefer another medium rather than writing, maybe you want to do something like making a video or an interpretive dance, something that really does braid together all of the mind, the heart, the body, and the soul. You got it. You should send it my way. So that being said, let's practice what we preach. What I would like to do for the next about 4 minutes is I'm going to turn on some jazz, and I'm going to give you the link to the new and improved Active Learning Spectrum. By the way, by no means done, constantly evolving, changing. And I'd like you to take a moment, permission to prioritize just perusing the Active Learning Spectrum. And as you're doing so, just a couple things that I would like for you to do. One, consider where you find a home in that spectrum. Like, consider where you might place yourself within the spectrum. So consider where you might place yourself. And then 2, I'd like you to find your way to the linked resources from the large and small group discussions. So follow large and small group discussions, and take just a moment to peek at collaborative communication. This dialogic technique provides an underpinning for how we like to communicate in LAMP. This is something that we learned from our mentor, Janelle Seeley, who is here today. Thanks, Janelle. And take a moment to just peek out what it means to communicate in this way. So some of you already know a ton about CC. You've been doing collaborative communication for years, and others, this is new. So maybe just take a moment to peek, and you can, if it's old hat to you, you can tell me how I did in representing it on this spectrum. All right, jazz is coming your way, and a nice, luscious 4 minutes. So we are practicing a really straightforward active learning technique called Think, Pair, Share today. So I'm now going to put you into pairs, and with what you've been considering, where you might place yourself on the spectrum, and then some of your thoughts regarding collaborative communication, I'm going to split you into probably two, but there may be some threes, so that we can chat a bit about that. And in your groups, if you could nominate someone who might be willing to share something. We won't all share today, but we might have time for a couple of teams to share. So be ready to tell us about some highlights.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, how are you today?
Yeah, we are okay. Looks like we were the first ones to come back. Oh, there's one more person.
You were organized.
Hey.
Tawfiq, I love your backdrop.
It's the actual lab.
Yeah, it's not even virtual.
I trick everyone by this. Like, I'm here on campus and they think I'm working from home. So
Yeah. There you go.
Tawfiq, I just saw your picture on the cover of the the magazine, you know.
I didn't see that coming, by the way. I took the picture here for an article, then I found it on the cover. So
Oh, it was great. I opened my mailbox and there you were, right on the front cover. So congratulations.
thank you.
Huge shout out. All right. I think we are all back. So, was there a highlight that came through in a discussion that anyone would be willing to share? And I noticed we had some groups that were some old friends together kind of randomly, and then we had some folks that were new to meeting one another. So I'd love to hear from any of those types of conversation.
So I was partnered with Jessica, and she's a returning LAMP fellow, so that was really nice. I'm new. Sorry, my name's Macy. I'm a ecology grad student studying microbiology. But one thing that I thought was really interesting that we talked about is the difference. We were talking about your blog post and the difference that knowledge scaffolding between like my field in biology and her field in physics and astronomy. Because something that we brought up was how biology, a lot of times, especially as an undergrad, is a lot of memorization. Depending on what you do, there is, some math and problem solving involved, but especially those classes like immunology and cell biology, it's just all memorization. So I was just telling her, like, I can't tell you how many exams I've memorized things just for the test and then forgot it immediately afterwards. And then Jessica was saying, well, there's some of that with physics and astronomy because of these long equations, but we're moving more towards, well, we have the internet, so you can just look it up. So she brought up an interesting point of how do we teach our students the things they actually need to know, and how can we promote that kind of discussion and collaborative communication in a classroom, and how do we determine, like, okay, well, eventually you'll just be able to look this up if you continue on with this. So it was an interesting discussion about the two fields, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Macy, and for your honesty too. I remember having a similar experience in organic chemistry where I literally was the top of the class and I aced everything. It was probably my best class ever. And then I sat down the next year to try to tutor and realized that it was all gone. I mean, it wasn't all gone, right? That's an overstatement when we say that, but wow, so much of it. And I didn't know I was doing it wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. Yeah. So sometimes we have to have those wake up moments as students as well. Yeah. And it is interesting to think about where disciplines are with respect to moving into problem solving as a primary means. So let's hear from some other one, at least. Well, no, we have time for a couple more folks. Would love. Jared.
Yeah, I was with Danny Dale, which you have to say the two names together, just so you guys know. And Ginka. And Ginka and I were in the same year, and Danny Dale was in an earlier one, but we had a good time. But what we found, what came pretty clear to me is that we all explained some things we're doing in the classroom, and we could easily connect 2 or 3 of the active learning pieces in the things we were doing in the classroom. So that was kind of fun how we just kind of drew a little bit of a web, how we mixed some different active learning techniques together and then put them into our classroom. So it's kind of a neat thing to think about.
Yeah, I love that. And Jared, you call attention to the fact that good innovations it's very easy to reinvent. And I think that is one of my favorite things about active learning, is that it opens up for reinvention by the user. And that makes us all feel as though we have creative lease on how we adopt these things for our classrooms. And it's a key to hitting the tipping point of innovation, which I would love a blog post from, oh man, that would be incredible. The 3 of you tell about the web of your AL techniques would be outstanding. Yeah, and I should say, Danny and Ginka, do you want to add anything? It's okay. Not necessary. And Macy, I should say to Jessica, did you want to add anything? Okay. Awesome. Well, let's hear from another group.
So I was with Barry and Shannon, and they're both instructors, but I'm a student still. And the thing that we talked about was the flipped classroom, because they implement the flipped classroom. But the only flipped classroom I've had so far was your microbiology class, Rachel. But we were talking about how at first the students were kind of wary about it because it's something different. And from my perspective, I did that same thing. But then as we go on, the students are like, they start to like it a lot more. And I found with my microbiology class that because of that active learning classroom, that's the material that I recall the most with it. So I thought that was kind of cool how we can see that working in students and stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you so much, McKenna. That is so incredibly valuable in terms of understanding how you're coming away from that experience with things that, while at the time there may have been, it might have been hard, right? And it might not have been always your favorite day, but that as you moved through it, that became something that you noticed you were building that knowledge and you recall it. That's beautiful. And remind me one more time, let's see, you were with 2 folks, Shannon and Barry. Shannon or Barry, anything to add?
I think McKenna did a great job of representing us, especially just that transition of the students, being kind of adverse to it at first, but over time becoming more open to different styles of learning. I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Great. And Barry?
Yeah, I think she did a good job. A lot of the students are really shy and they don't feel strong in math because I'm teaching math. And so, you have them working on something, then you call on somebody and they're like, it's all wrong. I'm not going to answer. No, just answer. Let's see where you are. And and then I don't say if they're right or wrong. I'll write the answer down and then I'll say, anybody else have anything different? And you go around until you get about 4 or 5 answers and then say, okay, well, let's work the problem and see which way is the correct way. And then they see, that there's a whole bunch of people doing it different ways. Sometimes they get the right answer. And so I think, it's helpful because it makes them so those that are shy actually have to answer and they feel uncomfortable, but when they get a right answer you can see that I got it right, yes, so it's kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're really seeing that process of testing, right? Testing the scaffold. And yeah. Thanks so much, Barry. And it looks like you I remember you emailing me and saying you didn't have any snow, but you've got virtual snow there.
We got snow on the mountain finally, so I've been snowshoeing up there.
Good.
Looks like you're going to get some snow today and tomorrow.
We are so hopeful. It's been a really hard year for Happy Jack, but we've done good skiing in the snowies, but yeah. Oh, okay. Hey, let's hear from someone else.
Yeah,
If I was with Ramesh, and I feel like a highlight of our conversation was, well, there was a couple. I got to meet Ramesh, which was great, and another one was we kind of talked about discussions and how they've played out in Ramesh's class and how they've kind of played out for me. And one thing that we were discussing was how to combat, like, you know, when you pose a question for groups to discuss, how do you work with the groups that go faster than others and finish and kind of almost seem like they want to leave versus the ones that take more time? And so there's just an interesting dialogue there. And how can we engage more with those groups that finish fast and the ones that take longer?
Yay. So Brett, for those of you who don't know Brett, is a longtime LA. He started when he was an undergrad, and he's now in graduate school in Zophys. And Brett just practiced a technique of collaborative communication. He posed an open-ended question that he's now thrown back to the center for us to think about. So this idea of how do we engage with student teams that are so diverse. If there's one team that rushes through and gets done very rapidly versus a team that's still working through and struggling. Does anyone want to take him up on that beautiful question?
I'll go in. This is Annie. Hi, Brett. I
Yeah.
like the question.
Yeah.
Because Tawfiq, who I was thrilled to meet today in my little chat group, we were talking about team building, and we both use teams in our teaching, either in STEAM camps or with you guys as grad students. But we figured that, you know, teams don't always work, and sometimes I have to assign them. But in the end, it's all a learning experience for them. Whether you get along with someone or not, that's part of the learning, not just the material that you're throwing at them. So,
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I like to, sometimes people will, the skeptics, we'll call them active learning skeptics. They'll say, well, you're having students do all the work, you're not even teaching, your prep is like limited. And, you know, for example, I love to do polling, and you know, if you do polling and the students show that they don't really understand the concept, you can't just blithely move on and just plow through your lesson plan. You need to stop and adapt. Ideally have backup material that's going to go more in depth into what the students are not understanding. So I think, you know, if you develop a good active learning curriculum, it's a lot more work than a traditional lecture. And so, Brett, I would say you would have backup material, other conceptual things you'd have ready to go to ask the students. It's the same idea like in lab, right? Some lab groups are going to finish early and some won't. And I like to have them take advantage of the full period, especially with me and the TAs present, that they should be doing other things that are productive, you know, get started on the lab report questions or things like that. So I would say have extra things ready to go for the ones that get through it quickly.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny. And that also calls back this book. This was the one I said, oh, it's over on my shelf, but Cooperative Learning in Higher Education. And this is the book that I got from Barbara Millis when we did her workshop when we were in Ohio at the Lilly conference. And she actually specifically talks about extension activities or expansion activities. I'm not positive I'm getting the perfect word, that are to allow teams that maybe are a little bit quicker to be able to continue their work. And that is one technique. And I would say another technique is to, so Liam is not here today, but he's another longtime LA, and he's developed the Invisible College for teams. So just as we as scholars have an invisible college that we are collaborating across institutions, he likes to make it so that across teams, there are people who are collaborating to assist across those teams, so that if you have one team that is very productive, that they can allow through that invisible college the assistance of another team. So that is something that, and actually I'm thinking, Brett, in biological chemistry last year, I mean, your team ended up kind of serving as a little bit of an invisible college link for another team.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, remember when Joe and
Yeah.
Eli? Yeah, yeah. That was kind of not that wasn't by design, but it ended up.
Well, yeah, that was good. I'm glad that they were able to come in. They were really like it was. Yeah, we can talk about it another time. Sorry.
It's okay. All right. Well, I definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I know that you may have 9 o'clock, but if not, I'd love to hear from others because some folks are quiet today. So it's just good to see you here. Mackenzie, you've been quiet. How are you, and what's on your mind?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Rachel. So Michelle and Monia were in a group with me, and we didn't have a lot of time to cover what we were supposed to because we were catching up. But the little that we did, there was a resonating theme for at least Michelle and I that our strategies in the classroom change based on what hat we're wearing or what class we're teaching. So Michelle, she's a lab coordinator and a primary instructor, and she has to balance how much active learning she can and should expect from GA's teaching biology labs versus she's wanting to push herself to ultimately get to a flipped classroom, which is a pretty advanced active learning strategy. And then I was talking more about how it varies from class to class. So this semester I'm teaching a class that's more problem-based, whereas if I think about some of my fall classes, I haven't quite gotten there, or I've used other strategies to try to increase the learning. So it's dependent.
Yes, contextual in all ways. Michelle, anything to add to that?
So the only thing I'd add is that at the end, Moni and I were actually talking about how we explicitly teach certain active learning strategies and tell students, this is why we're doing this, this is how it will, based on the literature and the research, this is how it can help you learn better. And so I have a whole lecture in both of my classes that I am primary instructor in that I actually teach them what is metacognition, what is active learning, what is mindset, since I study mindset psychology. And so I have this whole lecture where I actually explicitly teach these ideas. And the idea then is that students, I've heard them when you walk around the class, they'll be like, oh, this is metacognition, or they'll say something along those lines. And so they're actually learning some of that language, and they're having a better understanding of their own learning and what these strategies are actually trying to accomplish.
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle, in educating them in the educational strategies that we're using. And I saw Tawfiq nodding, and you tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, I agree with Michelle. I think sharing our teaching philosophy and the theory of learning with our students, I've tried 2 times, and the feedback was very helpful. I also give them a lecture about teamwork and why we have to work in teams, and some science behind it, because it's not always an art. And that's for teaching them how to learn. Because I found out some students, they actually don't have a good strategy to learn. So telling them how the brain works, how the mindsets, telling them feedback, all of this gives them an idea how to learn. And I found the theme, Rachel, in the blog that you wrote today. It's about the illusion of learning. Passive learning, give them the illusion that they learned and give us the illusion that we taught them something. Then that actually reminds me, I always tell my students, if I didn't give you a feedback, you have to ask me for feedback. That's how you learn. That's how you correct yourself. Putting them in teams will help them. If I didn't give them feedback, at least they get it from their peers. So I emphasize on the importance of feedback and feed forward. Like, here's what you did and here's how you can improve. And that's the beauty of active learning. There is so many ways for them to get feedback. And I've seen this helping out my students, and I hope it will help their students. And yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much. And Tawfiq and Jessica have accompanied me on a journey towards the development of visual teaching philosophies, and that those visual teaching philosophies are so easy to share with your students. And Tawfiq, at some point I will ask him if he would be willing to share with you all his visual teaching philosophy. Some of you have seen it, some of you haven't, but it's a really nice way to communicate to his students what is at the underpinnings, right, of that teaching. And I also love that you bring up the feedback. And so a topic, a book on that, if you may have already seen it, but John Hattie spent a little over a decade, and let me write his name, Hattie. He spent a little over a decade showing that amongst a huge variety of things that could impact learning, that feedback rose to the top as the number one most important thing. So those informal and formal ways that we give feedback, not grades, but very substantive suggestions for how that work can become better, and iterative suggestions over time that can be really very, very foundational in that learning process. Or maybe he would argue the most foundational. He didn't look at everything, but he looked at a lot of things in that research. So, thank you so much. Yeah, and Jessica, do you want to add anything on the visual format of teaching philosophy and sharing?
I guess just as a plug for thinking about it, it's a really good way to reflect on your teaching and forces you to, so not only is it great to share it with your students, but it also is a good excuse to really reflect and think about your teaching philosophy and what you're trying to do. So a lot of what we argued for, why we argued for it, I think, is that it helps evaluate your own teaching process and make sure you're aligning. So if you are looking for a good way to spend some time, it's a fun exercise, and it's something that you can always keep building on.
Yeah, and I would love to we've compiled a resource with Jessica's. Hers is a multimodal one. I have a multimodal drawing and narration, and Tawfiq has a visual one. I'd love to just keep compiling those amongst all our Lampers for how you're showing and communicating your philosophies. Beautiful stuff. Well, I see we're at the hour, so thank you all so much. This has been outstanding, and I hope to see you in future Fridays. It'll be wonderful. And yeah, reach out if there's anything at all that I can do in addition to support you.